Well, good afternoon. I'm Tina Gunnick, Managing Director of EBD Group US, and it's my great pleasure to kick off this last panel of the day featuring Global Genes. So Global Genes is an organization dedicated to connecting, empowering, and inspiring the rare disease community, and we're proud to partner with them on this event. It's now our 4th year doing this special session, and we also partner with them on a special rare disease conference in June in Boston, which you have a little flyer for on your tables, and the Rare Disease Film Festival also taking place in Boston. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Kimberly Hogstead, CEO of Global Genes, to hear more about the important work that they're doing. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Kimberly Hogstead with Global Genes, and so incredibly excited to have the opportunity to be here today and really welcome and Global Genes to truly have the opportunity to bring together the leaders from industry, research, and patient advocacy today who are truly blazing a path in artificial intelligence to diagnose, to treat, and treat rare disease, and just truly bring this to the table more rapidly and positively. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, John Reinders. John, yes, from Alexion Pharmaceuticals, as well as our panelists. We have Charlotte Hobbs from Rady Children's Institute for Genomic Medicine, Carrie Burke from Clinithink, Tim Williams from Helix, and Ranjit Alexis from Intel Capital, as well as Dave Bajorek of Fraxa Research Foundation. Thank you again so much for being here, and hope you get a great deal of information out of this session today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Kimberly. So welcome to today's panel, where we're going to demystify the value of AI for rare diseases in science and treatment. We got a lot of case studies to share with you today. We've got some definitions of AI because it's kind of a big umbrella term. So we want to share with you some of the definitions that we have here. Our case studies are going to go from examples in diagnostics all the way to therapeutics. So a lot of great content to share with you all today. So let's get right to it. And maybe we just start with some brief introductions, sort of name, title, a little bit about your organization. And we'll start with you, Ranjit. Go.
Thanks. Thanks, John. My name is Ranjit Alexis. I'm with Intel Capital. I'm an engineer by training. I joined Intel designing chips, but for the last 20-odd years, I've been investing. And I'd say for the last 4 to 5 years, I've been focusing on health and bioinformatics. And in the process, we invested, and we're a proud investor of Helix, and my CEO is right here on the panel as well.
Thank you. Dave?
Hi, I'm Dave Bjork, and I'm the Director of Community Relations for the Fraxa Research Foundation. We're based just north of Boston, and our mission is to find effective treatments and ultimately a cure for Fragile X, which is the most common inherited cause of autism and learning disabilities.
Right. Thanks, Dave. Carrie?
And I'm Carrie Burke. I'm with Clinithink. I lead up their business development and strategic alliances. Clinithink is an AI company working across life sciences and healthcare with a natural language processing engine that can read and interpret clinical data, unstructured narrative data within patient information. My background is over 20 years in pharma and biotech before joining Clinithink, with the majority of those focused on rare diseases.
Thanks, Carrie.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Tim Williams. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Helix, and we're a tech company from Cambridge University focused on using AI to predict treatments for rare diseases.
Hi. Thanks, Mark. Hi, I'm Charlotte Hobbs. I am the Vice President for Research and Clinical Management at Rady Children's Institute for Genomic Medicine, where we perform rapid precision medicine among infants and children with critically ill diseases, and I'm trained as a neonatal hospitalist and clinical informatician, and I'm an epidemiologist as well. So we're practicing again at Rady's rapid precision medicine.
Thanks. And I'm John Reinders. I'm Vice President of Data Science, Genomics, Bioinformatics at Alexion. Trained actually as a mathematician, been in a variety of biotech and pharma roles, and looking forward to our conversation today. As I said, we have sort of a couple, I'd say 2 main themes. One is going to be diagnostics and one is going to be therapeutics. And we'll start with diagnostics and we'll start with ladies first. Charlotte, we've actually had the good pleasure of collaborating on some really exciting work at Radies where we're combining aspects of AI and genomics to accelerate and actually establish some records in terms of genomic-based diagnosis. I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but maybe just share your definition of AI and also just some of the work underway at Rady.
So my definition of AI for us at Radies is it's the application of complex algorithms to analyze efficiently and accurately the enormity of biological and medical data to inform medical care and to improve health outcomes.
Great. And now, if we look at some of the work at Rady, what would be some of the examples or use cases? For example, I don't think the audience is aware of some of the world records that were established. Maybe just share a little bit of that story.
Right. So Rady, our institute, has the pleasure of holding the Guinness Book of World Records for having the fastest whole genome sequencing performed for diagnoses, so 19 and a half hours. So from the time the baby's blood hits our lab until we have a diagnosis that we can then give back to the bedside physician, it was 19 and a half hours. That was what we strive for. Our median time when we're dealing with our multiple partners across the US now, when we get samples from about 25 different hospitals, is about 52 hours, and we try to, we're constantly working at automating and using AI to make that time shorter and shorter so that the information can be given back to the bedside physician in a really timely way to be able to serve these critically ill babies and children.
Thanks, Charlotte. And also, it was a wonderful team effort. It was Rady, leading the way. Alexion was partnering. We had Illumina and Dragon. Also, CliniThink, because a very important part of this was actually the natural language processing and extraction, because an exome is a pretty big area. Where do you start to look? And so the utilization of NLP. Now, this is an acute setting, but also I know CliniThink is looking at what do you do in maybe the chronic setting where you don't have the benefit of a genome, but you have all this data sitting in EMRs, and there could be a patient like right in front of us. And there's a lot of very interesting deep phenotyping work that CliniThink is embarking upon. So maybe, Carrie, you can share your definition of AI and some of the work in deep phenotyping.
Yeah, of course. And I'll just sort of add on to Charlotte's definition because that's pretty much the same as ours. But I want to just make sure that everybody's clear that AI is not the be-all, end-all, and artificial intelligence still requires a lot of human interpretation at the end of the day. And so we use our AI tools to help providers make more informed decisions and to get a faster and deeper understanding of the patient data and the patient journey.
Great. Oh, thanks, Carrie. And so this is sort of our example on the diagnostic side. I'll sort of chime in with my definition of AI, and I'm a bit of a classicist purist. I like to go all the way back to Alan Turing. I don't know if folks know the definition of the Turing test, but Alan Turing is a mathematician who, British mathematician during World War II, known for leading the effort to crack the Enigma code. And one of Alan Turing's many contributions was a very elegant definition of artificial intelligence, the Turing test, which basically is as simple as this. You have two terminals, and in one terminal you're having a conversation, typing a conversation, and you could be talking politics, history, language. Another terminal, you're having a conversation. You could be talking sports, how do you feel, philosophy. And this goes on where you're having these conversations between these two different terminals. Passing the Turing test is at the end of however long a set of conversations you want to have, you can't tell on the other side of the terminal who's the human and who's the machine, right? Very elegant definition. What's kind of a little striking to see is in some areas, for example, Kasparov being beaten. So in chess, we've seen this in backgammon, we've seen this in Go, we've seen this in Jeopardy, Ken Jennings. We're now actually seeing this in very quintessentially human games like multi-hand, no-limit Texas Hold'em. You're even seeing online strategy games like StarCraft II, where AI is really behaving in human-like performance. And actually, we had it was the Frontier Genomic Conference actually in San Diego recently. We had a panel just like this, and we were reflecting. If we look at the area of diagnostics, it's really striking how close we are to having Turing-like capability in terms of enabling diagnosis. Now, don't get me wrong. I've got a daughter and a wife, and I wouldn't want a machine doing the diagnosis. I want a human. Thank you very much. But boy, I'd like that doctor to have at her side, his side, a Turing-capable diagnostic platform to inform. So very exciting what we might be seeing in the future with AI. Now, let's pivot over to therapeutics. There's an example of diagnostics and AI, but there's also a lot of exciting work happening in therapeutics, not just in discovery and clinic. So, Tim, let me pivot over to you. I mean, Helix is a very exciting story. A lot of times there can be a lot of buzz around AI, but actually you've got examples of not only have you applied AI in discovery, but you have programs that are well along in the clinic now. Very exciting. So maybe just share a little bit about your definition of AI, but then also the Helix story.
Yeah, so I guess I'll focus a bit more on the meaning of AI and machine learning for rare disease patients. And I think there's never been a more exciting time for rare disease patients, and that is because of AI and machine learning. So you can get much quicker diagnosis, much cheaper diagnosis. You can get treatment opportunities that most rare diseases didn't have in the past. And more importantly, patients and families are really being empowered. And we'll share the story of our work with Fraxa. But AI and machine learning is really kind of this driving force for improvement of quality of life for those patients and families. And that's really, it's happening right now. And I think the story we had with Fragile X, I think was pretty incredible. And so we managed, I think in 2016, Fraxa, the patient group, approached us and asked if we could use our AI to predict treatments for their disease. And so we analyzed the data. We made predictions for monotherapy, drug combinations. And they had this amazing network and engaged KOLs who were really so responsive. So within a month, we got our drugs tested. And to our own surprise, we tested 18 combinations. And if you're not familiar with combinations, that's actually a pretty hard problem to crack in drug discovery. So if you look at combinations of 2 or 3 drugs, you have about 13 billion possibilities per disease. So how do you select the top 10 or top 18 to test? So we did that, but then from the 18 that we tested, 17 came back positively. And 5 of them were fully active, rescuing every phenotype in the mouse models and showing synergy, which was really exceptional. And then we continued our partnership with Fraxa to design the clinical trials, the clinical protocols. And so within 18 months, our drugs were ready for a phase 2A clinical trial. And this is really the power of AI, of the right partnerships and a super engaged and driven community. And that's why patient groups and advocacy is essential. And so it's a really, really exciting time. So if we don't get delayed, we'll enroll the first patient for combination therapy by the end of March. And they approached us in 2016. And so this is really a game changer, I think, for the rare disease community. And I think Fraxa has had such an impact on Helix and our model, because then we realized how effective this was. So we worked with other patient groups. Every project we work with a patient group. We're now scaling that. And because of our success, we've been approached by really large investors, including from the tech community, which is also a game changer for the rare disease space, because suddenly there's more capital available with people who believe things can be different, things are scalable, believe in tech for good, in impact. And so we announced a $56 million round in October. 10 months before, we'd raised $10 million. So suddenly, within a year, we raised $66 million to do rare disease drugs with patient groups. Like 10 years ago, this would have not been possible. And that's really amazing. And Fraxa really helped us to figure out the model. And then investors like Intel Capital were really amazing to kind of back mission-led businesses where AI, machine learning, can really disrupt a space that was challenging in the past.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Great example. And not only just the application of AI, but you highlighted actually the partnership with Fraxa and how critical that patient advocacy group, being part and parcel, like even trial design. I know this is something we're very focused on at Alexion. How do we ensure that the patient-centric view at all phases of development, discovery, development, launch, the patient is front and center? Dave, so looking at the partnership with Helix, I guess a couple of things. Sort of what catalyzed it, and then what excites you most about the partnership today and where it might go tomorrow?
Oh, yeah. So everything he said is just it's been a really amazing journey with Helix. Fraxa was founded by two parents who had a 3-year-old son with Fragile X. And we've put millions of dollars into research, and we've uncovered the target mechanisms and the targets, but unfortunately, any of the trials that we developed over time have had poor results. And so we really felt like we needed to change the paradigm. And so the conversation started around, hey, we've seen some success and some commonly, some already FDA-approved medications. So that's when we approached them and say, well, maybe that would this repurposing, say metformin or some drugs that are perfectly safe and in use, and let's see if that can work in Fragile X. And that has kind of evolved into these combinations, and as you mentioned, the combination trials, it's like something really difficult. So we're extremely excited about the timeline. I think that's if you think of the Fragile X community, you think of parents like Mike and Katie, the founders, whose son just turned 30. So they've had all of these years of trying, and all of a sudden now they're saying, well, we can shrink that time to get something to help patients, as you said, to make their lives better. So that's what we're super excited about, because these families are desperate for something to, and they think that some of these things will just take 1,000,000 years, and so now within this short period of time we have some really promising things happening. So I think it's exciting for the community, and certainly for Fraxa. So, and I'd like to mention that I love these kinds of partnerships when, I will say, oh my gosh, we love the work that Helix is doing, and then Helix to say, we just love working with Fraxa. Isn't that really how industry should be working with a patient group? So I think it's a very good model, and so going forward, so.
Wonderful archetype for how biotechs and advocacy groups should be working together. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
We're going to go to Rajit next. I do want to comment. We have a couple mics, and we're going to have plenty of time for some questions and answers. So start thinking about your questions. Otherwise, there will be a quiz. So, Rajit, over to you. What's your definition of AI? And actually, of all the different companies, here you are in the Valley, right? But you found a rare disease company, biotech, looking at AI. What
in the UK.
In the UK. So what led to that investment?
Yeah. So your first question, definition of AI, and that's a very broad question for a tech company. So I'll try to, give my answer within the confines of what we're discussing today. So when I think of AI, I think of a technology platform that can reduce cost, improve outcomes, improve access in the areas of care, cure, and prevention. So that's how I look at AI. So, and that's how we look at our investment thesis in this area. So if someone came to us and said, hey, we got this really cool molecule, we're going to go and optimize the heck out of this molecule for curing, let's say, lupus. That's not an area of competency for us. There's no way we can do the due diligence and say if this makes sense or not. We stay away from that. Now, in terms of Helix, when I first got the call, I had already looked at probably about 20 companies in the space. And what I thought was unique about Helix was they were focusing on rare diseases with existing molecules. So that reduced the risk because these molecules were already being consumed by humans. And so a certain amount of risk was taken away. And the second thing was they were using a computational platform to determine which of these molecules that are already existing can be targeted to rare diseases. And then the third thing was that they're working closely with some of these patient groups. And the last one, and perhaps the most important one, was the team. And some of the teams we've looked at here in the Valley is these are computer-centric informatics folks who have the hubris to say, you know what, we can go solve all the problems in biology. And sometimes we have folks from the biology side who have very little knowledge in informatics say, you know what, we can just go ahead and analyze it and get the problem. What's interesting about biology is you rarely see a 16 or an 18-year-old biology genius. You could see a 16 or 18-year-old computer genius because you have to learn before you can start building solutions. And what I saw with Helix was they had a good blend of both. So perhaps the most important aspect in our decision to invest in Helix was the team. So we made the investment, and in the process of talking to these advocacy groups, as part of our due diligence, it's one of the few deals I'll say, and I've invested in a number of deals, where after the deal was done, you actually felt good that, if this company succeeded, not only will we make money, but there's going to be a positive impact in society. And so this was something that we felt good about. So we'll see. I hope I answered.
Great, thanks, Roji. So this gives you
another piece of this too is we talk about drug discovery and we talk about diagnosis and using the phenotyping ontology, for instance, to help come to a diagnosis. But a big piece of that is even just being able to find patients to go into the clinical trials. These rare disease clinical trials often have a laundry list of inclusion-exclusion criteria, and they're very difficult patients to find. And that's one of the other ways that we use AI within CliniThink is we use our Clicks and Wrench engine to actually dig down into the unstructured narrative data that lives within patient documents. Discharge summaries, reports, those types of things. And then we can query that data exactly for inclusion-exclusion criteria. And we can find patients that otherwise would probably not even be given the opportunity of a clinical trial. And we did that at Mount Sinai for a rare kidney disorder where the study team was having a very difficult time finding patients. I wrote down my numbers so I say the right numbers, but manually the process that they were using, they only could find 3 patients to be part of this clinical trial. And when we went in with Clicks and Rich and used our query engine, we found 8 patients. And more significantly is the amount of time. I think that's another theme I'm hearing. That's, we do it much faster, much better, quicker, and the same thing within the manual process. It took the team about 9 months to find those 3 patients. Within Clicks and Rich, those 8 patients, those were found in a matter of 2 weeks and verified by the investigator. I mean, that's a significant time savings. So we found, over 2 times the patients in about 5% of the time. So, and that's when my background's in biotech and pharma, and I've worked on many, many clinical trials where it's just like finding a needle in a haystack to find a patient. You might have an investigator with maybe 1 patient, and that's, an entire site's been set up for 1 patient. But the patients are there. They're there. You just have to find them. And so that's also one of the benefits of AI is in that piece of the puzzle. So finding the right targets, diagnosing patients, finding the right targets, and then also pulling those through the clinic to make sure that those are successful.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, at Alexion, when we're recruiting for trials, we just hear these nightmares from these patients and their families of the diagnostic odyssey. It can take on average 6 to 7 years sometimes for there to be a diagnosis. So, we can have these marvelous treatments, but if the patient isn't diagnosed, the treatments just sit on the shelf. So it's the diagnostics and therapeutics together. And again, remarkable the role of AI in terms of what might be possible.
Yeah.
So we've shared a bit about sort of projects we're working on, our background. You've heard some of our thinking. We've got plenty of time for Q&A. We got a microphone set up on each side here. I have a few questions I might ask the panel, but definitely want to open it up to the audience if you got some questions based upon some of what you heard, or maybe just some other questions in AI in general in rare diseases and diagnostics and therapeutics. Please. And if there's a particular person on the panel you want to address it to, or just open it up to the whole panel, fire away.
Sure. Thanks for the fantastic panel, by the way. I have a question about longitudinal data. So you can get kind of snapshots of patient populations from individual health systems. Hopefully there's some sharing between different health systems where the same patient is attending different health systems and has their data situated in different areas. But are there any good examples of situations where longitudinal data, maybe the same patient followed over multiple years prior to a clinical trial context made the difference in accelerating development or making a new discovery? Anybody is free to jump on that one if they have one.
I can jump in a bit on the diagnostic side. I know this is a bit of research that we've been undertaking at Lexion. And again, just looking at the diagnostic odyssey, the longitudinal data is absolutely critical, because what you're trying to do is there might be a point in time where, okay, the patient is on a therapy, and rewind but ahead of that or before that, and there was a point in time where the patient was diagnosed, but that patient has been burdened with that disease. So go back even further. What were the signatures, the pre-signatures that could help us understand there was misdiagnosis, underdiagnosis? So longitudinal data is absolutely critical. It's a little bit difficult in the multi-payer system. This is one of the reasons we, for example, we're collaborating with Genomics England because of all the longitudinal data we can access through NHS. So we can get those prodromal pre-signatures that are so important that let us understand that patient really should be now, we should order a genomic assay to double check. So longitudinal data is essential for pre-diagnosis. Other folks on the panel?
Well, we've used longitudinal data from an all claims database in one particular state where you have all claims database, and so then you can follow, for example, our use case was with kids with congenital heart defects, and some of them are extremely rare, depending on the phenotype, and then following a particular population of a birth cohort of kids through time, so that you can see what their healthcare utilization is and what, even as adults, so that we took kids at adolescence and then followed them through into their adulthood to see what sort of encounters they were having and what sort of complications. For example, many of the survival rates have increased a lot for kids with congenital heart defects. So you now have women who have serious and complex congenital heart defects actually having babies of their own. So being able to look a little bit into the issues around having a pregnancy with underlying congenital heart defects as well.
Great. We have a question over here.
Hi there. I'm Maria Picconi with Trend Community. My question's for Dave and for Tim. I was wondering if you could speak to any challenges that you faced, if any, in accessing the data that you fed into the engine.
Yeah, great question. And I think that's the challenge across rare diseases is basically the data gaps, because there's a lot of data sets missing. And so we start by, okay, we have algorithms who identify the relevant data sets, the relevant papers, the relevant patents. So that's kind of automated, but there's always data gaps or data that's not of the right quality, with not the right number of replicates, et cetera, or experimental design. And that's where, again, Fraxa was amazing, because we said, hey, Mike, the transcriptomic data, so that's gene expression, is not great. Can you help us generate transcriptomic data from relevant patient-derived cell lines? And Mike's like, yeah, great. I know someone who has the cell lines and an institute who can generate you the transcriptomic data. And that becomes quite advanced. And I think this is where you really see the patient groups become so sophisticated. Like, you can ask them to contribute certain data, and we help them with the study design, but it's so when there's data missing, they're key. Or another example is for selection of the drugs. You know, if you have two parents like Mike and his wife, they know so much about the disease, so much about the symptoms, so much about drugs that they've tried and failed, and all of that is super useful information that we use as well for the algorithms.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that last point. That's what I see is that experience, and particularly with, it's kind of unique. Interesting that our foundation was founded by parents, of a son. So not only that they, Mike's a medical doctor, but they've been working with their son over so many years and have some relationships within the community of friends and other people, members of the community. I mean, there's just thousands of people that they, over 25 years, have. So there's a lot of. I just think that's an important role that the patient group, and we like anything we can do to help with the process. So.
Some other questions? Please.
So hospitals are asked to have antibiotic stewardship programs that you must be familiar with. At what point does an AI program for a rare disease get embedded back into the health system or vice versa to be able to take an antibiotic stewardship program that's first in AI and be able to use that data set to then potentially find new patient populations with rare diseases? So twofold question.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part, antibiome? I didn't quite catch that.
Antibiotic stewardship programs.
Okay, got it.
So is the team familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Charlotte, over to
Maybe
you.
at Rady's
Yeah,
question.
at Rady's, right. Throughout all hospitals, right, throughout the
Correct.
probably developed world have antibiotic stewardship programs. How do we bring them into the rare disease arena? I think that there are certainly, maybe the most compelling example that I can think of right now is within some of the rare cancers, right, where you have a child who's immune deficient anyway because of the cancer, and then you really need to be carefully thinking about the antibiotic that you're going to use, not only because of that child's illness, but also because of their host, so their underlying genomics as well, and then trying to take that molecular diagnosis that they have plus the antibiotics, plus the pathogen that they have, and really consider it very carefully together. And I would say that we are still in the phase where we are doing it empirically. My hope would be that I know there are multiple groups working, both in industry and in academia, who are working to try to make it so that we can use those data together in more of a systems approach and being able to use all of the data that we have rather than just using empirical thoughts and previous experiences. But we're a ways away, I think. Maybe only 2 years. It used to be when you said a ways away, it was 20 years. Now I think because of the rapidity with which things are being done, it's sort of that exponential growth, maybe it's 2 years.
Yeah, it's an area of opportunity in general.
For sure.
And one thing to build on Charlotte's observation, what's really critical with any AI is data. Lots of it, high quality, diversity. No amount of great mathematics or computer science can make up for not having enough data. So many of these models are absolutely critical on the data that can drive the decision support in AI. So, another question.
Actually, on a related note to that, so you mentioned quality of data and you mentioned team as well. As you look at, a lot of the engines are getting commoditized, right? So you can use AWS or Google Cloud to kind of have your core machine learning engine. And then I would imagine it's in the interest of patient groups to share data across multiple players. So what is it that you all see is going to really distinguish the companies or the businesses that really come out ahead versus the ones that are sort of the also-rans or aren't as successful with this?
Yeah. You're right, the algorithm is a commodity. The biggest challenge is, we talk about data, and then you talk in terms of clean data and dirty data, where you have data and the fields are half filled, and you're trying to go ahead and fill it. So I'll give you an example of a company we looked at that was trying to use data to predict the best course of action, the best course of treatment for oncology. The data was not very clean, so what they did was they were trying to hire oncologists to go fill out those fields. And that's not a very scalable problem. So there's, from a technical standpoint, one way of solving it, which is to use AI and NLP, natural language processing, to go to the best possible effort, go ahead and fill those fields out. But now the output is a function of how accurate your input data is. The only way you can solve that is to be able to give oncologists very specific mandates in terms of how they need to go ahead and input data. But that's a problem. So the cleaner your data is, the better off you are. And we've seen some companies who now say, we'll give you the EMR system. This is how you need to go ahead and input the data. And so they're starting from scratch to go ahead and build out this data. So there's no easy problem there. But in terms of sharing data, we've seen a number of different ways in which data is being shared, because hospitals, they don't want to give out that data. They don't want to put it in the cloud. So one approach is what they call as federated learning, where the data is sitting in the hospitals inside that premise, and the algorithm travels from hospital to hospital and starts getting trained. And so that's one way. But federated learning is just one approach. And if you talk to some really seasoned data scientists and AI engineers, they'd say that's the best way. But there are about 5 other ways of doing it as well. There's this interesting methodology called differential privacy, where they don't really send out the data. They have algorithms that just give you a high-level overview of what the data is to the algorithm that travels, and they're able to go ahead and make sense out of it. But I think at this point in time, federated learning has probably the best chance. But I got to be careful, because there could be interesting improvements in some of these other areas as well. There's another one called multi-party compute, where there are 2 or 3 or 4 people trying to come ahead and use data to train the algorithms, but they're completely oblivious of the underlying data. They just see that trained algorithm. There are folks who are able to train the algorithms using encrypted data. So the data is always encrypted, but the model is able to go ahead and make sense of the encryption. But when I look at all of these, I would probably say, much to the chagrin of some of the other folks, from my vantage point, I'd say federated learning is a little bit ahead, but it's too early to tell. And maybe all of these might have a place down the road. But having clean data is step one. And I think we're still a little bit a ways in getting there.
The one thing I would add also, great examples, Reggie. I'm going to look up some of those. Those are really cool. I think one thing that'll differentiate companies, there's some companies that say, let's just bring all this data together, that is related to questions we might want to ask, and we'll pull it all in a data lake, and we'll take these various algorithms and go look for things and see if something comes and emerges. I think that's not a very efficient way to do things. Now, this is provocative. There are definitely, emergent, views. There's also hypothesis-driven views. The data is only good as, the algorithms are only good as the questions you're asking of the data. That informs now, here's the data you need, here's the right algorithms to use. So having it be a hypothesis-driven process rather than wide open, I think is another thing that'll differentiate companies in this space. Thanks. Please.
Yeah, sure. Ashley Evans, SynGap Research Fund. Curious, you've talked about diagnostics and therapeutics. Curious how anyone, probably Carrie, but not sure, has thought about better analysis of endpoints, for a lot of these patients, or for a lot of these populations, the data is so dispersed, so if it can be gathered in the right way and correlated, can better therapeutic recommendations be made, or small molecules be identified?
Do you want to? You're shaking your head. So.
No, it's go ahead.
Yeah. So when you look at, if you can find by looking at patient populations, you can look at different signs and symptoms of different phenotypes. If you can pull that information together and use that information to actually help write your clinical endpoints, that's a very successful way of doing that. So I don't know if you have any other comments.
I think it's a great question, and it's a really tough one within the rare disease space, because ideally you want a validated clinical endpoint that the regulators are going to accept, which is the important part. And for 95%, so maybe 90% of the rare diseases, there's never been a clinical trial. So there's no approved and agreed endpoint. The regulators will not know what to do with it. And what they will typically do is take the closest related common disease and then try and apply an endpoint from that, which the patients and the family will tell you makes absolutely no sense. And so that's the tough part. And I think what's interesting with the technology that's now available is part of our analytics is based on a knowledge graph, which is a relationship, a database of relationship. And that's what Google uses for their search engine. And so you can really build that. And we've built one, a rare disease biomedical knowledge graph. And what's really interesting is that you can start predicting the missing information and by using neural networks. And that's where we've seen amazing results. And so you kind of go around this data gap by actually predicting what you think the missing information will be. And endpoints is a really important one. But I think there, what's really tough is getting the regulators to agree on your endpoints.
Right. So we have a few minutes left, and I guess the way we'd like to close the panel is I'll ask each of the panelists, if you were to look into your crystal ball, like 5 years out, and look at rare disease, whether it's diagnostics or therapeutics, what do you think the role of AI is in this future 5 years out, looking in your crystal ball? Arjit, maybe we'll start with you.
For rare diseases specifically,
yeah.
I'd say to be able to build out a comprehensive knowledge graph on rare diseases and trying to map that with some of the existing molecules. So I'm pretty much pitching what Helix is trying to do, but I think that's the holy grail. I don't know, as bad as it sounds, pharma is still, driven by capitalism. So the whole concept of trying to start from scratch and build out a new molecule where it's going to take maybe $3 or $4 billion, best case scenario, to hit a target segment that's only about 300 or 400, patients, is something that has to be disrupted with something that's more low cost. And I think to be able to take existing molecules, map it into a knowledge graph, and be able to find some therapies and remedies for some of these patients, I think is where AI would play a huge role.
Thanks.
I would totally agree, and I think that's why I mentioned earlier that this paradigm change for Fragile X was so meaningful because of all the problems and the time that over those years of trying to uncover these, develop these drugs, and some big trials that had poor results, 7 or 8 years ago, and of course from the community perspective, from the patient group, it's so disappointing. It's like everyone's just like, they lose hope, and so I see right now with these combinations of therapies, and thinking we as our group, we couldn't have found this as quickly as they found. And so I think the time to getting, I think in 5 years, I see actually significant progress where we're actually going to have treatments that are going to improve the lives of people with Fragile X. So I'm super excited about it.
Thanks, Dave. Okay.
Yeah, I think, so I'll go at it sort of from a different angle, but I think, within healthcare in the next 5 years, artificial intelligence won't be a scary word anymore, and it'll be our friend, and it'll be something that's utilized on a regular basis, whether it's from a clinical trial perspective or even diagnostics perspective. I mean, we have phenotyping ontology that we can do today and go in and look for signs and symptoms and flag patients who probably are highly likely to have a certain rare disease and have those patients go and seen by their physician and really shorten that diagnostic odyssey window. So we can, if we start to do this from a population health perspective, I mean, just imagine that 6 or 7 years diagnostic odyssey could turn into, a month, And so I think in a crystal ball, in the perfect world, I think once the healthcare systems start to, utilize AI more and see how much potential it actually has, I think we could get there.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, so I think for us, by 2025, what would be amazing is to basically have real proof of concepts of molecules and treatments that were predicted by AI machine learning platforms and are actually on the market, being taken by patients, and really have an impact on patient lives. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been AI-predicted therapy that yet made it to market, but the timelines are becoming very short. Obviously, we hope it's going to be the Fragile X one, but there's many more, and I think there's also been a lot of hype around AI, and I think Ranjit is probably has headaches by the number of AI startups that go and pitch to him. And if there are any startups here, if you add AI in your title, you raise your valuation tenfold. So I think, yeah, just convince the skeptics that it works and can impact patients.
Charlotte?
I hope that we are able in 2025 to be excellent stewards over the next 5 years to grow a workforce of physicians who are really confident in their ability to use AI, and that they then can use it to diagnose and to identify treatments for children with rare diseases, and that they can interact then with the families and listen very, very carefully to the families of those individuals with rare diseases, so that the time that they may have spent combing through the charts and doing some manual work because of AI is shortened, and so then they can put their humanity back in their care of patients and families.
Thank you. Well, this brings our panel to a close. I want to thank the audience for your kind engagement, some great questions, and please join me in thanking our panelists for a great session. Thank you.
So this brings to a close day number 2 of Biotech Showcase. And indeed, John, I'd like to thank you, Ranjit. I've written everybody's name down, Dave, Carrie, Tim, and Charlotte, and most importantly, Kimberly, for organizing such a great panel. Thank you very much for joining us. And just so you know, I'm Sarah Demy, one of the founders of Biotech Showcase. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't keep it just...